So in this segment, we're going to discuss an article that I found very, very annoying. I'll be honest. So this is about Rory Stewart. So, man, I read this. I don't want to, Joe. Let's caveat this. I don't want to belittle mental health or any of the struggles politicians face. We saw a politician, Joe Cox, was murdered. A good few years ago. It's nearing a decade now, really, when you think about it. So I don't want to belittle anyone's kind of mental health or make it belittle kind of politics, because it can get very polarizing in this country. And if anyone is having mental health struggles, we've seen Steve Baker have a really odd moment where he said he broke down in church, etc. So I don't want to belittle any kind of thing when it comes to politicians. It can be a stressful job, but what Rory Stewart is saying here, victimising kind of Tory MPs, claiming, we were kind of the victims and things like that. I'm like, we were a victim of your poor management, of your party's poor management. So former Conservative Minister Rory Stewart said some fellow MPs came very close to taking their own lives when he was in the Commons, and the life of a politician placed quote, almost unsustainable, end quote, strain on people, which is very, very believable to an extent. The life of a politician, given the way they speak to each other and about each other, this is not too surprising, especially with, how kind of heinous the right-wing media can be when it comes to enemies of the people and that kind of stuff. Stewart said that he saw, colleagues have total breakdowns in public, which I never heard about any of them having breakdowns in public. That could be my own ignorance, or maybe Rory knows something I don't. He said, quote, "I don't want to talk about the specifics because this is deeply personal to people, but yes, colleagues tried to take their own lives. These are people I knew, and in very serious ways, I mean, they almost took their own lives. It's a miracle they aren't dead. There were other colleagues who had total breakdowns in the most humiliating, personal, embarrassing fashion possible in public," end quote. And I think if it's in the public domain, he could have mentioned them with permission. But again, I did not hear of any of these stories of any politicians having breakdowns. Rory said the nature of a politician's job often had an impact on their mental health. He said, quote, "I think it's because the gap between the way that MPs are encouraged to present themselves to the public, who they really are, is almost unsustainable. It's mad because you're pretending to be all-knowing, perfect, dynamic, confident. You're pretending that you've got the answers to everything and that I know where we're going. The truth is this is a country of 70 million people and politicians don't really know what's going on, yet we pretend to the public that we do," end quote. And I think to an extent he's not wrong. But I think, if politicians make the odd mistake, it's not that bad. I mean, Ed Miliband baking sandwich aside, I think that, people can be fairly forgiving. The problem is the media and other politicians jump on them. Maybe if politicians weren't so kind of just desperate to attack each other and, go for, really stupid attacks, we would be in a better place. It would be less polarizing. I think if you look at the differences, kind of the way the House of Commons is versus Holyrood, it's a lot less adversarial. But again, who are the people who brought adversarial politics into the mainstream? Is really the Brexiteers and the Tory party when you think about it. So to play a victim, I don't get it. And, given that this is a guy who played a part in austerity, played a part in ruining people's lives, and him and his colleagues, let's not forget, hard to feel any sympathy for him, to be honest. And it is true that this is a country of millions of people. It can be difficult and you have to appear to know what you're doing, but that's why you assemble a crack squad. That's why you have civil servants. That's why you have good political advisors. It's not just you are the face of it, yes, but you're meant to run a department. If you're a minister, if you're an MP, you have a team. That's how it's meant to go. If you just follow the whip's line, then I can see why you'd end up in this mess, because you'd be answering questions in a way that feels dishonest to yourself, and that can break you when you push things that simply fundamentally are not true. But that's the choice you make when you go into party politics. If you follow the whip and, that if that's all you do, if you want to make it up the chain, then yes, this is what you have to do, but this is the price you pay. We asked the question, is sanity the price to pay for power? And evidently, this is the price that a lot of these, or some of these Tory MPs here paid. He said, quote, "I would find myself sort of creepily trying to sit next to David Cameron at lunch. Then I'd send these texts saying, congratulations on your latest policy that I really didn't believe in. And so I began to feel I was being made in my early 40s into some kind of child. I'd been the acting governor of Iraqi province responsible for 3 million people and a Harvard professor. And I'd run a charity in Afghanistan. I thought that I was a reasonably sustainable person. And that I realised as soon as I became an MP, that was all wiped out. Nobody takes you seriously anymore," end quote. And I think that's not, when he says, when he says this, right? Again, he's playing victim. He's trying to pretend he's the victim of this political system. Like, if he was a minister at this point under David Cameron, which I don't know if he was, then he chose to be a minister. No one forced him into it. If there were votes that weren't three-line whips, he could have either done pairing, which is you sit with another, basically you and another MP, who's on the opposite side, who's going to vote against something when you're going to vote for something, or vice versa. You could have gone with that option, so you don't have to vote. Your name won't be on the record, or you could vote against stuff. You could actually be a rebel. You could actually say that I don't agree with this policy, therefore I'm going to vote against it. This policy wasn't in our manifesto. I'm against it. This idea that he was the governor of an Iraqi province, a Harvard professor and all this kind of stuff, trying to say, look, I'm a big man. I've done big things in my past. Surely this is what I mean about Rory Stewart. Like, people say, like, he went to Afghanistan, he did all these things, he went into politics to learn how it works. Like, bro, like I've never been an MP. I've never been elected into office. The closest thing I have to politics is my channel. I know how this works. You could read a book to learn how the whip system works. You could ask a politics teacher, A-level politics teacher, because we don't do GCSE politics in this country, how this stuff works. It's the whip system, bro. You either vote for the party or you don't, but there are repercussions if you do not vote for the party. This idea that you're saying congratulations on the latest policy, I didn't agree with. If it's in the manifesto, you stood on that. If it's not in the manifesto, you could have voted against that, depending on if it's a three-line whip or not, which three-line whips are very rare. So this kind of whole thing of, oh, I'm a victim, oh, I did all these great things, but once I became a politician, no one cared. But, like, it doesn't make sense, because he says, nobody takes you seriously anymore, right? But then you juxtapose that with him saying, you have to pretend to the public you're all-knowing and perfect. So clearly people do care. It doesn't make sense. Evidently this sentence either is aimed at someone very specifically, i.e. David Cameron, or, whoever was then Prime Minister at the time, or he's just talking rubbish. He's trying to play victim because he's trying to rehabilitate his image because he went to run for London mayor. This is the guy we're looking at. He's trying to rehabilitate himself in the public eye, despite the fact that I call him austerity boy for a reason. The department, he's talking about the NHS and other things like that. Like, I don't want to belittle anyone's mental health here. I think it's important, that you are open and honest when you're not doing great. And you try to get help. The best thing you can do if you're in a situation where you're not doing that well and you have the means to, or it's available to you, is go therapy. I can say that's a person who's been to therapy, as a person who does struggle from week to week. Sometimes I can honestly say that go to therapy. That's the best thing you can do. But this idea that Tory MPs were victims and that he felt belittled as an MP and all this stuff, boo-hoo. Not to the first stuff. I'm not saying the ones that felt like they couldn't do this, they should have resigned. If you felt like you couldn't continue on with the policies your party was pushing, you either become an independent, which you can do within that parliamentary term. You vote against the government as best you can if you're not a minister, and if you are a minister, you resign. Those are your options. If you fundamentally disagree with what the party is doing, you have options at your hand. But the difference is these people chose to stay in these jobs that, were paid incredibly well. These people are not victims. They're paid very well for, find me another job that pays 80 Gs and has minimal work like this. So I can tell you there are nurses, there are people in hospitals, right? People in schools who work way harder than any one of these politicians, don't get paid half of what they're on. And these people contribute positively to society. These brothers here, these sisters here, do not contribute positively to society. Not these Tory MPs. Makes me sick. I read this story, I felt ill. I reread this story, I felt ill. So, if you are going through struggles, go to a therapist. Go to someone who has credentials that might be able to help you, depending on what your struggles are. But this idea that Tory MPs were victims, cry me a river, pal. You guys knew what you were doing. This idea that, he told David Cameron, oh, congratulations on your new policy I didn't believe in. No one forced you to back the ting, bro. No one forced you to back it. You did this on your own. You did this to yourself. Again, I hope these Tory MPs that did have public breakdowns, that I'm not belittling them, but I'd never heard of it. Any of these Tory MPs, the most famous one I can think of is Baker, but Baker didn't have it wasn't made public. He made it public, as far as I'm aware. So, I'm glad he got help. He's leaving politics. I think a few of the other ones will leave politics as well. But, when you look at the damage, Tory MPs have done to this country and you want sympathy from us, nah, bruv. Go to therapy, go get help, get better. But don't ask for sympathy from the public, because you don't deserve it. Anyways, let me know what you think in the comments, and I'll catch you in the next one.